Hi everyone, I'm Alex Rosenfeld, founder of Freshwater Investments, and this is Coffee with the T-Bird podcast. I sit down with fellow T-Birds who are making an impact in business, leadership, and entrepreneurship. Each episode features conversations that explore the pivotal moments, personal motivations, and lessons learned on their journeys. Whether you're a student, alum, or someone passionate about business and personal growth, you'll walk away with fresh ideas. This is a bit more than a podcast. It's a platform for connections, storytelling, and celebrating the global spirit of Thunderbird. This podcast is sponsored by Freshwater Investments. At Freshwater, we make it simple for you to invest in large apartment communities across the United States so you can earn passive income, grow your capital, and benefit from real estate tax breaks without owning or managing property yourself. Hi, Glen. Welcome to the show.
Good morning. Thanks for inviting me.
Of course. How are you today?
I'm excellent.
Where do I find you?
So I'm in Torrance, California right now.
Excellent. So thank you for sending your bio, and I asked my AI assistant to write me a short description of my guest for today, and this is what it said. So the Glen is a globe-trotting, mountain-scaling, whiskey-loving martial artist who also happens to be a sharp money manager and business owner. He's a black belt from Japan, a new grandfather, and a seasoned adventurer who's backpacked the world twice and still finds time to volunteer in community security. Basically, if Indiana Jones and John Wick opened a whiskey bar, Glen would be running it. So quite a description, quite a life, quite a journey. Yeah, I appreciate it. I appreciate the sharing all of it with us. So we have a lot to talk about. I'm very excited about our conversation.
That's great. I've never been compared to Indiana Jones and John Wick before, but I'll take it, man. That's great. Thank you.
So let's start. Let's talk about your whiskey loving career. And you describe yourself as a whiskey aficionado and specializing
Absolutely.
in Japanese whiskey.
Yes.
So let's start there. Let's say I want to get into the Japanese whiskey. Where should I start?
So I would say that there's a handful of really amazing Japanese distilleries. So what a lot of people don't know about whiskey in Japan is that there was one gentleman who created the Nikka whiskey factory. He actually went to Scotland to study, I believe it was chemistry, and he basically fell in love with Scotch whiskey, studied it, as much as he could right there on the ground. He actually married the daughter of the couple that ran the guest house that he stayed in, and he brought her back to Japan and was in Japan with her during World War II. I don't know how they pulled that off, but he actually brought whiskey making to Japan. And the Japanese being the Japanese, which I consider to be a craftsmanship culture, they ran with it. And, 100 years later, they have developed some of the finest whiskeys in the world. So there's the Suntory Whiskey Factory, right? The Suntory. And they create famous brands like Yamazaki, Hibiki, Chita, Hakushika, all those wonderful whiskeys. And then also there's Nikka, and they're actually truer to what I'll call a Scotch whiskey, peaty, smoky, really, really delicious. Whereas the Yamazakis and the Hibikis are more kind of sweet, caramel, vanilla, in flavor and things like that. I love both, but I find that Japanese whiskeys have a very distinct flavor, and I love them. And believe it or not, every once in a while, you'll go into Costco and there'll be some Japanese whiskeys at far under the internet prices. Matter of fact, I just bought a bottle of Hibiki 21. My wife was in Costco and saw it. It was $650. And I said, look, I'll never find that price again. And I bought it. Right.
Okay, congrats. Awesome. So what's your kind of everyday whiskey versus, you just mentioned that special occasion whiskey, but what's the everyday whiskey that you would sip on a regular basis?
I would say for Japanese whiskeys, if you like just a basic utilitarian whiskey to use in mixed drinks and highballs and stuff like that, I would say Toki is actually a really good one. It's very, very affordable and still has a distinct Japanese flavor, and also hibiki harmony, which is no age, but still a very, very nice blend. And I would say that from a Japanese whiskey standpoint, those two would be like really great daily drams.
Excellent. I assume did you travel to the Japan and tour those whiskey shops? So you can do it as if you go to Scotland and touring the whiskey houses.
Yeah, so I did go to the Nikka Whiskey Factory in Hokkaido with my family, my father-in-law, my wife is Japanese, and my son, and that was just a great family experience. And then I've been to the Suntory Whiskey Factory in Takatsuki, Japan, and believe it or not, that was with my economics class when I was going to Kansai Gaide University. And, we just had such a wonderful time at the whiskey factory that my buddy from Singapore and I, we decided to take the party into Osaka. We'd only been in Japan for about 6 weeks, and that was the night that I met my wife. So I've got a very, very deep connection to Japanese whiskeys.
Right. It couldn't be any deeper.
Exactly. I can definitely say that Suntory whiskey changed my life forever.
There you go. That's going to be a title for this episode.
That's awesome.
So let's go back to beginnings. Let's talk about your story. Where did you grow up? Maybe talk about your parents and your family a little bit.
So I actually was born in Detroit, Michigan when my father was in military service. So he was an auditor with the U.S. Army, and he was auditing defense contractors. And then he got transferred to Washington, D.C., to work in the Department of Commerce and as a CPA. And we moved to Reston, Virginia, which was a brand new town in the 1960s, and it was surrounded by woods and forests and stuff like that. And so my dad worked for the federal government and did very well. He rose to the highest levels of civilian service and even audited a governor during his career. My mother was a professional artist and an art teacher and was the head of the art department at a local junior high school. So, I kind of grew up in this eclectic community. Reston was kind of different from the surrounding towns to it. There was a lot of DC workers. And I grew up with people, whose parents worked for the military or the CIA or the FBI or different industries. And they would basically travel around the world and come back every 2 or 3 years, bringing these amazing stories of these exotic destinations that their families had been stationed in. One of my best friends, his dad was a consultant with the United Nations, and I remember him bringing things back from India, Nepal, and Egypt, and places like that. And I remember from when I was, a small kid, just having this wanderlust for travel, and I wanted to travel the world. So much so that at 5, I remember stealing a rowboat from the local lake with the intention of sailing to Europe. It did not work out, but I ended up in the lake.
But you got the travel bug.
But I got the travel bug before I even knew what a travel bug was. That is for sure. I can definitely say I was really lucky because I grew up in a time where there was no internet. We didn't even have answering machines on our telephones back then. TV was mostly black and white. I remember getting my first color TV. But I was able to be kind of a feral child and just spend all my times outdoors in the woods and things like that, getting into all kinds of mischief. So it was pretty cool.
What was your dream job when you were in high school?
It's interesting. I didn't really develop, quote, a dream job until, after Thunderbird. But, to be honest, I was heavily influenced by the era, the 60s and 70s. I wanted to be a musician. I was actually a really good musician, but I didn't have the discipline or the talent to make a living at it.
What instrument did you play?
So I played flute and guitar. One of my favorites was Jethro Tull. So I used to do all kinds of crazy electric things with the flute, but I had a wide range of musical tastes, everything from Led Zeppelin to local bluegrass. But, once I went to Japan as an exchange student, my focus was just to work in as many industries as possible and get as much experience as possible, and then just kind of figure out what to do. I knew I wanted to be some kind of consultant or professional, and I was leaning in that direction. And then also I remember as a little kid thinking that if I ever wanted to become wealthy, I should work with money. It just made sense to me. You know, if you want to make money, work with money. And essentially that's what happened.
And so talk about how did Japan and martial arts entered your life?
So I was on the University of Arizona karate team. I just kind of like fell into the martial arts at the University of Arizona, and it just cascaded into this passion for the language and the culture. And I wanted to go to Japan, and I wanted to train karate there. And I did my research at the university, and I kind of like found this kind of exchange program that hadn't been used in a few years, and I dug it out of the closet. And me and a friend of mine, we just kind of reinvented it. And we went to Japan as exchange students from the University of Arizona. And I just kind of stayed.
Tell me about your first few days in Japan, your first trip, if you remember, about your impressions. Did you have a cultural shock? I'm sure it was quite different at the time. But do you remember anything about that?
Yeah. So I was going to the University of Arizona, and the first thing that hit me was the humidity. Because it was in the middle of August, and, I just remember sweating all the time, right?
After dry heat in Arizona.
Exactly. And also, I wasn't used to living in a big city, so being surrounded by planes, trains, automobiles, and people all the time, that was an interesting twist. And then, of course, everything was small. Rooms were smaller, apartments were smaller. I found myself suddenly a tall person, which I'd never experienced in the United States. And of course, the food. And I had studied the language, but what I realized, first of all, is that I couldn't understand anybody. Because I had studied standard Japanese, and I went to Osaka, which speaks the Kansai dialect, and it was very different. Family that took care of me did not speak standard Japanese, and it took about 6 to 9 months to really understand the differences between the two dialects and start putting things together. So I actually speak 2 dialects of Japanese, the Kansai dialect and standard Japanese.
You mentioned that you lived with the host family.
Yes.
Can you talk about these people?
It's interesting. It's interesting. I was quite disruptive to this poor family because, number one, I was older than the other 2 sons. The eldest son found his position a little bit threatened because I was getting a lot of attention. And then I would do things that would shock the neighbors, things to us that were just completely normal. Like I would wash my own clothes and I would hang them up on the, not knowing that the entire neighborhood was observing me hanging my clothes in the balcony. And my homestay mother, who had a full-time job at the electric company, was getting chastised by her neighbors because she wasn't doing my laundry. And I had actually specifically told her not to touch my blue jeans. Like, that was sacred back then. Yeah. Right? So, there was all kinds of weird cultural things that, would have never occurred to me. I was a latchkey kid. So I grew up making my own meals. I grew up, doing my own laundry. All these independent things were just completely natural to me. I had no idea that I was revolutionary in Japan at that time. You have to think about it. So I was in Japan for the first time in the early 1980s. That was the era of the Showa, the end of the era of the Showa emperor. So, the Showa emperor was the sitting emperor during World War II. So, it was a very different time. It was a different era. And it's weird to talk about this because even though I am in my 60s and I'm a grandfather and everything else, I don't really feel any different in my energy and my ambitions and everything else than when I was in my, I'd say, late 30s and 40s. So, it's interesting to have this perspective because I use the internet and technology and AI and all these things on a daily basis. But I grew up with none of that.
Yeah, no, I understand. So you were in Japan, you got exposure to kind of international life. And how did Thunderbird came into picture? When
So,
did you hear about
yeah.
Thunderbird first, and why did you decide to go there?
So I was lucky enough to hear about Thunderbird at the University of Arizona. And, I remember my economics professors and my Japanese language professors like talking about Thunderbird as this kind of mysterious program of kind of misfits and miscreants. And I was immediately attracted to that. These global travelers and, anyway, I was just very excited about hearing these stories. So I actually went to Phoenix and, applied, had an interview. Back then, by the way, the application for Thunderbird was 2 or 3 pages. That was it. I don't know what it is today, but, I remember the application process was far simpler than the application process is today. And I went for the interview and I got in. So I was supposed to start Thunderbird in 1987, but I went back to Japan and worked for another, 5 years. And I extended, right, until I got this letter one day saying I had to choose or reapply, right? So I had to choose to go or reapply. And the timing was perfect because the Japanese economic bubble had burst at that time, the real estate bubble of the late 80s, early 1990s, and it was time to go to Thunderbird. I do have to say that while I was working in Japan, I was doing a lot of international commercial real estate stuff. So I was very interested in contract law and stuff like that. So I got a little confused, like, am I going to go to business school or am I going to go to law school? So, again, pre-internet age, I sent away for over 50 catalogs, from 50 different business schools in the United States and had them send them all to my apartment in Japan. Mm-hmm. And I drove myself crazy for about 5 or 6 months trying to figure out what I was going to do. And then one day I just spread out all the catalogs on my tatami mat room in Tokyo and with Thunderbird catalog in the middle. And I just said what I really want to do. And my intuition just said, go to Thunderbird. So I picked up, the Thunderbird catalog. I packed all the rest up in a backpack. I took it to work, dumped it in the library for other people to use. And that was it.
Do you still use intuition to make your decisions right now?
I do use my intuition to make decisions. However, I also understand the drawbacks to intuition. So I like making intuitive, informed decisions.
That's a great approach.
It's a big difference. But I tell you, it definitely led me in the right direction. I will never regret having gone to Thunderbird. It was a life-changing, amazing experience.
So any favorite memories about your life at Thunderbird?
So I have many, many wonderful memories from my time at Thunderbird, and it was short. So I was only on campus for about 1.5 years, but it was definitely the most transformative educational experience of my life. The reason why I was there for such a short period of time is because I did something stupid and I tested out of language. So I went in and the Japanese professors tested me and they basically said, there really wasn't much they could do for me. My language requirement, I should have taken Spanish or Chinese, right? So if I were to do it all over again, I would have taken a language and I would have stayed longer. But, I was married, so I was hanging out with the couples crowd. My wife it's interesting. Another transformative thing is all my friends were having kids while they were at Thunderbird. Right. So we just said, well, why don't we try? My wife immediately got pregnant. My son was born 2 months before graduation and attended my graduation.
Oh, that's amazing.
Right. But I was doing all the martial arts demonstrations for Asia Night. And, I remember all these incredible, learning experiences. Thunderbird was very challenging academically. I remember at times, like studying 36 hours straight to pass an exam, taking the exam, coming home, crashing for 17 hours. The group projects were fantastic, but I'll say the moment I stepped on campus and met other Thunderbirds, it was the first time in my life I felt like I was surrounded by like-minded people. And, to be honest, I didn't want to graduate.
That's great. But I'm sure you had to graduate, and then you had to find a job to feed your newborn son.
Oh, you're darn right.
How did you find your first job after graduation?
So I graduated in 1992, and it was a terrible year to graduate. So the United States was deep into recession, and most Thunderbird graduates were not finding jobs at that point. I was very, very lucky. I was one of the handful of Thunderbirds who graduated with a job. What I did is I went to this job fair in Boston called DISCO. I don't know what DISCO stands for, but it was for Japanese English bilinguals, and I got hired by Arthur Andersen. So I went to Los Angeles to become an international business consultant. Very underpaid, but at least I had a job. I remember loading up the U-Haul, hooking my car up to the back in a trailer, and just hightailing it across the desert to LA.
Did you want to go back to Japan and work there?
So, interesting question. And the answer is no. And the reason why is because I found, at least back then, that there was definitely a glass ceiling for foreigners. So there was only so far I could have progressed in Japan. And also, Japan is not what I'll call a truly entrepreneurial society. And so I felt that, and also I had never really worked as a professional. I mean, of course I had had jobs in high school and college in the United States, but I'd never worked as a professional in the United States. And I just wanted to see if I could compete.
Well, it's a good segue to talk about your entrepreneurial journey and your business. Can you tell us, when did you decide to start a business, and how did it go first couple of years? Was it challenging to start your own practice and so forth?
Yeah, it was pretty brutal. So I graduated from Thunderbird and started working at Arthur Andersen, and I was specifically hired by their international tax department, and I was also helping the customs and international trade division. And after a couple of years, I realized that, I just couldn't wait to make more money. LA was very expensive and things like that. So I started putting out my resumes. And by the way, every single major career move that I made somehow had a Thunderbird involved. So I actually sent my resume over to Deloitte and Touche, to a Japanese buddy of mine who was working over there. And he put my resume in his partner's inbox. And the guy that was running the Customs International Trade Division over at Deloitte was borrowing this Japanese partner's office and saw my resume. He was a nosy guy, and he just took it and called me. So I got hired, and I went there and got, raise in pay, and I could finally breathe a little bit. And then, interestingly enough, one day, Frank Torelli, who was the Western Region managing partner, said something in a all hands meeting. There was like 500, people in this big hotel, ballroom. And Frank, basically got out in front of everybody. And at one point in his speech, he says, by the way, if anybody has any good ideas, write up a plan and give it to me. And it appears I was the only person in that room to hear that. So I actually wrote up an entire business plan for a international consulting practice called the Global Market Entry Practice. And I walked into his office and I gave it to him, and he liked it and he funded it. Right. So I went from being basically a senior staff to the managing director of my own practice.
Wow.
And people were very upset with me. I remember people saying, how did this happen? And I told them, I said, well, he asked for ideas, so I gave him one. They said, you can't do that. I was like, well, the man asked for ideas.
Yeah.
Right. But, I guess the accountants and, and everybody at Deloitte basically wanted to stay in that box there. I mean, I'm not dissing that mentality, but, definitely was one to kind of break the hierarchy of steps. I mean, the way it worked at Deloitte is
That's a great story. That's a great story, Glenn. I'll make sure to share the story with my kids, because that's how you progress, right? That's how you grow in everything in life.
I mean, the way it worked at these big accounting and consulting firms is there was staff and there was managers and there was there were staff and senior staff and managers and senior managers and directors and partners. And I just skipped over that just because I just thought I could.
Yeah.
It's basically the power of asking, right? And
yeah, exactly.
And we'll talk a little bit more about that because I have some stories about the power of asking just recent, if you have a reasonable argument, you have rationale, you can back up, you can back things up with facts and strategies. Any reasonable person is going to listen to you. But anyway, then I was in international practice. 9/11 happened and crushed international trade. I mean, basically all that international stuff after 9/11 just kind of stopped for about a year. And American companies have very short attention spans. And, if you go a year with reduced revenues, then there's, always a restructuring going on. It was time for me to do something else. And so for about 4 years, I was like teaching and volunteering. I taught at USC. I taught at UCLA. I taught at Cal State Fullerton.
And what did you teach?
So I was teaching entrepreneurship and financial literacy through a nonprofit called the Academy of Business Leadership out of Southern California, Edison. And we would bring in like disadvantaged kids from the inner cities, like South LA and, East LA and all those places like that. And we would basically take hundreds of kids onto these great universities and take them to big financial institutions and places like that and basically expose to them a world that they had never experienced before. So I did that for a couple of years. And then it was just time for me to start my business. And again, Thunderbird comes in. Miwa Wong, who is the current and past, president of the Los Angeles Alumni Association, who is somebody you should interview.
Well, I'll take a note.
Yep. She introduced me to my current business partner about 20 years ago when we were all kind of in a job searching group. And he's kind of an honorary Thunderbird. He graduated with a degree in finance from London Business School. He speaks Spanish and Portuguese and lived in Europe and married, his wife is from Portugal. And, he's a accomplished technician and one of the best portfolio construction analysts that I've ever met. I love to close deals, big deals. I love that. And together we just built this business. So I kind of came into it screaming and kicking. I was also started this business with zero salary. And since I had adult responsibilities like, at that time, a stay-at-home wife, a kid, car payments, school loan payments from Thunderbird, mortgages, big major adult expenses. Even back in the early 2000s, I had to net about $100,000 after taxes just to make ends meet. And I had less than a year to make that happen. So I basically got really, really, really busy.
So how did you find your first clients?
Again, Thunderbird comes into play. So I had no expectations of ever having Japanese clients. And I went to a Thunderbird, alumni gathering in downtown LA at the City Club, which is at the top of one of the skyscrapers in LA. And a wonderful human being who recently passed away and a Thunderbird, Katsu Takahashi. He was my first Japanese client. And then we created a group, a Japanese business referral network in the Japanese business community here in Los Angeles. And just by word of mouth, it just kind of spread. And what really surprised me was that I was getting chosen by Japanese corporations to run their retirement plans for their employees, both defined benefit pension plans and 401ks. I was getting chosen by Japanese individuals to do their things when I was in competition with native Japanese speaking other advisors. And it stumped me as to why I was being chosen. So I asked, and I was told that I was American and a native speaker, and I understood my country's financial system and my country's taxes and laws, and I was able to explain it to them in Japanese that they could understand. So because of my knowledge, because I became a real student of the business. I became obsessed with learning everything I possibly could because I realized as a financial advisor, I was not selling product. I was actually selling knowledge. And, our approach to finance, especially financial planning, is very much what I'll call the physician's model. If you go to a doctor and you say, hey, doc, give me some medicine. And the doctor say, well, what are your symptoms? Right? Just in a very simple way to explain this. You say, oh, forget the symptoms, just give me the medicine, right? No doctor who's, worth their license is going to, issue a prescription like that, right? We feel the same way about finance. We're financial doctors, right? We must do a thorough diagnosis. Like, in our opinion, there's no good or bad financial product. It's all how it's used and applied. So we match the client's financial issues with a proper solution. And I think that's very, very important. Never pushing product, but pushing basically solving clients' financial problems. So getting back,
Would you call yourself financial advisor or wealth manager?
I'm definitely a financial advisor, but we're also fit the definition of wealth managers. That's for sure. Let me say one other thing. So not all of my clients are Japanese. We do have many, both individual and corporate. And I actually have a number of high net worth individuals living in Japan, but the firm itself has clients from all over the world. And, my business partner, Daniel, has, this kind of nest of high-tech entrepreneurs from Latin America, Brazilians and folks from Mexico and things like that. And also we have a big expatriate market. So these are Americans who live overseas, but because of the way the U.S. laws are structured and, legal compliance and things like that, many Americans have to keep their investment accounts here in the United States. So we have a significant expat practice as well. And a lot of just regular domestic folks too, but we love working with what I'll call, business owners and entrepreneurs. And also we kind of have this subspecialty in what I'll call kind of the immigrant business owner, like people who came to the United States to achieve the American dream and have come here and done it. Right. And because of all the international connections and the tax treaties and everything else, the fact that the United States taxes its citizens and residents on worldwide income and worldwide assets. Japan, by the way, does exactly the same thing. There's this regulatory environment that has to be navigated. And we've basically developed this deep expertise in just that. So we're kind of this boutique registered investment advisory and general insurance agency. And when it comes to international estate planning, that's a major project for many of our clients.
So that's how you differentiate yourself versus your competition, I assume.
It's funny, competition. Let's talk about that for a little while. I really don't feel like I'm in competition with anybody. Every once in a while, like we'll go head to head with like a major financial institution, like JP Morgan Private Wealth or whatever. And we hold our own. I think what's really different is that, we are fiduciaries. Right. And as fiduciaries, we have this best interest standard that we have to comply with. And I don't know, it just seems to kind of work out. So I just have this general expectation that we're going to do really well. It just kind of happens.
So do you still need to do any marketing, any promotions with your client base right now?
That's a fantastic question. I would say for the first 15 years in the business, we had to run hard. Every day out there meeting people and speaking with people and lecturing and doing seminars and, basically, networking in different groups and things like that, building this client base. I would say for the last 5 years or so, business just kind of comes in and we've been extremely lucky. So again, as an entrepreneur, you get to choose the 18 hours a day that you work, right?
Yeah.
But even these days, like I was in the office until, 9:30 last night. 'Cause I have clients in the States and then I talk with Japan and stuff like that. But, for example, this year, we wanted to bring in like over $30 million in new assets under management. And we actually hit that goal by July 1st.
So can I ask you about total AUM?
Yeah. So like I said, we're not huge, but we've got like well over 200 million. And then we've got about $500 million in an insurance portfolio. So, we are an SEC regulated, registered investment advisory. And in our world, like if you've got 100 million of assets or less, you're regulated by the state of California. But above that, you get regulated directly by the Securities and Exchange Commission. And, we're definitely in that territory. One of the things that I love is the fact that because of my background at Anderson and Deloitte and my business partner having been, a Series 24 holder and running a broker-dealer out of New York for a Portuguese and Spanish company. We're very compliance oriented. So our first audit with the SEC, we just passed. As a matter of fact, we were doing a voluntary internal audit before, and our audit was actually had more data points than the SEC. And when we told them that they had called us to audit us in the middle of our own internal audit where we had hired outside consultants, they said, well, just send us the report. And we did that and they didn't call us back. They were say, great, the 15-minute exit interview and we were done. So, and I want to pause for a second here. So in this industry, there's lots of opportunity to, to basically not do the right thing. Right. So, I find it very, very important to have a personal code that we always do the right thing, even when nobody's looking, right? And whenever we've been confronted with people that wanted us to do something shady, which has happened, we were once approached by some Japanese guy out of Singapore who, we found out later was in the Panama Papers. We sniff out bad actors really fast. And, when it comes right down to it, like, don't even be tempted. There's so much good legal business out there to do that there's literally absolutely no reason at all to, compromise yourself or compromise your values. So, we're very, very quick to just eliminate those kinds of folks from our business world.
Excellent. So let me ask you a question about insurance. And it's a bit of a selfish question. I'm a little bit over 50 and I have two kids. They go into college soon. And,
right.
When should I start about thinking about life insurance?
Well, to be honest, you should have started thinking about life insurance when your kids were born. Like they say in the industry.
Just late already.
They say in the industry, if you love somebody or owe somebody, you should be getting life insurance. Well, first of all, let's put this into context. So as a holistic financial planner, life insurance is just a piece of the puzzle to solve a very specific thing. And life insurance is also treated very differently from a tax perspective from any other type of financial product. So what we do is we'll do, again, a diagnostic and figure out how much life insurance you should have or if you need it at all. So we believe that we should look at the exposures that you have. Like if something should happen to you today, what would it take to pay off your mortgage, take care of your wife, you're in your family, make sure that your kids can finish school, et cetera, et cetera. And we put all those data points and all those factors into our model. And then we'll pretty much determine exactly how much insurance you should get and what type of insurance you should get if you have a permanent need or a temporary need, right? I would encourage you to just, give me a call and I'll give you a complimentary kind of like diagnosis and we'll see what should happen there. But, again, life insurance I consider to be an extremely important product, but it gets a bad rap because of the way it's sold. I believe that life insurance should never, quote, be sold. I think life insurance should fill a need. And you should keep the premiums to a minimum, right? Because nobody wants to be insurance poor, right? They want the proper coverage that's appropriate for their situation at, the best cost considering the reputation of the insurance company and things like that. Because when it comes right down to it, life insurance is basically just a contract to pay, right? On the tax saving side, there's, in the United States in particular, the death benefit is completely tax-free if it's structured properly. And then there's also ways to get supplemental retirement income tax-free out of these policies too, which should be taken into account. I consider it to be kind of an asset class among the many other asset classes that are out there. Mm-hmm. I think that's enough for that.
No, that's a great answer. That's a great answer. I appreciate it. So, if someone thinking about opening a financial advising practice,
right,
or becoming a registered investment advisor, what do you have an advice? Do you have some ideas how to go that route?
Yes. You can do it the hard way like I did, which is kind of just barrel into it and, learn by trial and error. Or, go get a job at a registered investment advisory with somebody that you respect and learn from a master. I would say these days in particular, what a lot of people don't know is that after the great financial crisis, although there were great intentions to restructure Wall Street, there were a lot of powerful interests, and they got their hands slapped and things like that after the great financial crisis and things like that. But, a lot of the rules changed most for what I'll call Main Street financial advisors because, we didn't have what I'll call the strong lobbies and things like that. So it is a very complex regulatory environment that we have to work with. And there's a new fiduciary standard. So if you want to stay in this business for the long haul, you've got to learn how to keep your practice in legal compliance. And that can take up to 25% of your time. So we work in the financial planning industry, we work at the intersection of what I'll call finance, tax, law, insurance, all these things. They all come into play. Therefore, we work a lot with attorneys and CPAs and things like that, both domestically and internationally, on kind of joint projects, especially for complex estate planning cases and things like that. I would say go work for somebody who's super smart and learn everything you can from them. And there's two ways. You can either go and work for them and take over as a successor, or eventually you can go out on your own. But, you can definitely make a major shortcut by going to work for somebody and learning from them. And the biggest trend, at least that I find today in the world of finance, especially advisory work, is the registered investment advisory. So we've got people who are leaving Wall Street in droves. They're going independent. They're setting up their own RIAs. There's a huge market out there. We literally get called once or twice a week by big, say VC capital backed companies that are trying to buy people like us. So there's a big consolidation in the industry going.
Is it something that you would consider to sell eventually your practice?
I'm just having too much fun, and we've been very methodical and thoughtful about our practice. The goal is to have $1 billion of assets under management in my active career. I believe we can do that within 10 years, just with the growth of the AUM and just the amount of new assets that are coming in on an annualized basis right now. I mean, we've literally grown 20-fold since we went independent in 2016, right? So, I'm very, very confident. So what we did is my business partner went out and we hired these consultants called FP Transitions. And we've structured our company like a partnership, very much like a law firm or a CPA firm. So junior staff can rise to the level of partner. And we've already promoted, our first, account executive and financial advisor into the role of junior partner. So my hope is to transfer the firm within. And also, I don't plan to retire anytime soon. I just don't see, for me personally, I just don't see any value in retiring. I mean, most of my clients become my friends. Why would I want to stop talking to my friends about important stuff as long as my brain works, right?
Yep.
My father worked as a CPA until he was 83. And then I noticed a rapid decline after he quit. I want to keep active. I want to keep my brain going. I want to be excited. I want to be engaged in the world. I want to make a difference for as long as I possibly can. The bottom line for me is I want that financial independence, and I want the option to retire anytime I want, but I want to continue working as long as I can. And I can definitely say that I feel that I'm at that stage at this point.
I think we came to a great place to wrap up our conversation. I have a few questions, kind of quick questions at the end of it. So what advice would you give to a 20-year-old self, given what you know today and your experience?
Okay. I actually wrote this one up. Right. I could definitely say that as a young person, I wasted a lot of time being indecisive and second guessing myself. For now that I'm older, I determined to just be for no reason at all. Right. I would definitely counsel myself to be more fearless and have more faith in myself, and believe it or not, belief in God. I think that having a really strong spiritual base is incredibly important in business. As I mentioned earlier, you should always be in a position to do the right thing, especially when nobody else is looking. And as a financial advisor, we have a special duty to our clients, and I take that extremely, extremely seriously. I would also say that another thing which is incredibly important is to learn the value of delayed gratification. So delayed gratification is the act of giving up something now for a greater reward later, right? The opposite of instant gratification. And that is basically, the fundamental principle that you need for investing and in life. And it's investing in yourself and your education. As you can see against the wall, I'm a chartered financial consultant, a chartered life underwriter, an accredited investment fiduciary on top of the MBA and everything else. I take lifelong learning and everything else. I'm constantly investing in knowledge, right? And so delayed gratification is incredibly important for any level of success in anything that you want to do. And last is, don't be impressed by big names and credentials. If you're a Harvard graduate and you can't back things up with, hard work, discipline, and results, I'm not going to be impressed by you. I'd much rather have like a Cal State graduate who's super scrappy, incredibly hardworking, and never gives up, And, I'm more interested in who you are as a human being as opposed to, what you look like on paper. I think.
That's great. So let's talk a bit about your volunteering and your community. Can you talk about nonprofits that you're supporting and what you're doing in your spare time?
So I consider giving to charity and nonprofits really, really important. I also believe that it's incredibly important for your success in business and in life. So I definitely give a substantial portion of my income away, but I do it very strategically. So I pick certain organizations that I care about, that are addressing issues in the world that I care about, and I give to them monthly. And I started donating when I was broke. I would give I'm Jewish, so there's special numbers that you can give. Like 18 means life in our culture. And so I would give like $18 a month to certain charities that I really cared about. And I kind of exercised that gifting muscle. And then over the years, as I earned more income, I would up that, and I would continue to up that and everything else with the goal of reaching, maybe 10% of my income. But that wasn't enough for me. So I also volunteer. These days, and by the way, one of the places where I donate a lot of money is to Ukraine, because I'm very supportive of the defense of Ukraine.
We appreciate it.
And other conflict zones and things like that. And I'm also a fully licensed security officer in the state of California, and I actually do volunteer armed security for synagogues and institutions and things like that have been under attack. So, I definitely put myself in kind of the line of fire. Now, it also requires me to be in excellent physical shape, and I probably, I think I volunteer between 30 and 40 hours a month as a volunteer security guard in the community. So, Yeah, it's interesting. I don't talk a lot about that, but it's something that is really incredibly important to me. So what I do is I try and, donate to, basically, those in need in conflict zones, including in the Middle East and Israel. And I also do, donations to protect the environment and to just help people in need. So I would say it's those categories that I spend a lot of time putting my efforts in.
Excellent. Thank you. Do you have any message to Thunderbird alumni?
Like other people that have done this podcast, I would say get back involved in the school. So, every decade since its foundation, Thunderbird has had an existential crisis, right? Where people thought it was going to fall apart and that would be the end of Thunderbird. The universe wants Thunderbird to exist. I was very supportive of ASU and Thunderbird getting together for this very specific reason. I mean, there's a lot of Thunderbirds out there who basically just gave up on Thunderbird when it merged with ASU. And I find that, an improper response to the transformation of the school. Every single major, business program in the United States and around the world, with the sole exception of just a handful, these business programs are all associated with major research universities, right? So, Harvard Business School is Harvard, London Business School is the University of London. UCLA has the Anderson School. USC is the Marshall School of Business. I mean, I can go on and on and on and on and on. When I was at Thunderbird in the early 1990s, ASU was not at that level. ASU today is a transformed, incredibly innovative school, and it is now a major research university. And Michael Crow really kept every single promise he made to Thunderbird. The new building is extraordinary. And I really realized that when I was, at one of the first reunion, I was back there, and I was on the roof of the new building at like midnight, smoking with a great group of guides and professionals. But, maybe I'll go to AIF and then, and see how that goes. And then maybe one day go back and do that. That would be like really, really cool. I actually think that's cooler than like Mount Everest, and, because even though 10 feet, since it's in that Arctic environment, it's one of the most challenging experiences you can have. And we'll see, I'm toying with the idea, like literally just toying with the idea of doing McKinley, Denali in Alaska, buddy that I trained karate with there. And he posted a picture of him climbing Denali in the 1980s. And I said, hey, you this in 2026, and he says, hey, I'm turning
that's great. Thank you.
in 2028.
Last question.
Are you up for it?
You've traveled quite a bit.
We'll see.
Tracked quite a bit.
If I can pull it off and get into the kind of shape that I know that needs to be done.
Backpacking destination or travel destination, or the new mountaintop you want to conquer.
Backpack and haul 125-pound sled just to get the base camp. Very, very different from, let's say, the Himalayas and stuff like that, because there's no Sherpas to hire. You got to haul all of your own gear. I'm pretty confident. Right training, maybe. Anyway, that's the dream. My pleasure, and I really enjoy it. And hopefully somebody will find this conversation useful. Okay, take care.
Well, I think it's a good time to wrap up. Thank you so much, Glenn. It was a wonderful conversation. I enjoyed it a lot, and I learned a lot. So thank you for taking time, and I really appreciate it, and best of luck to you. All right. Thank you.